Welcome all to this fireside chat, a special event during our two-day GPIC conference, in which my colleague Lilian Maccaria and myself have the honor of welcoming and interviewing Jacqueline Novogratz, founder and CEO of Acumen. In this fireside chat, we will explore what it is like to work with GCF as an accredited entity on impactful and transformative projects. You, the audience, are invited to submit your written questions or comments in the event platform WOFA. Live remote interpretation to French and Spanish is available. Participants are invited to select the language in which they would like to follow the entire session by clicking the interpretation button at the bottom of the streaming window. Automated live captioning is available in several languages. Please note the link in the session description within WOFA. Full video recording of the session will be available on WOFA after the session and later on the webpage. And with those practicalities out of the way, and before we launch into introducing you, Jacqueline, and firing our questions at you, let me quickly introduce Lilian and myself. Lilian is the GCF's Head of Portfolio Management. Lilian is a Kenyan national. She has 21 years of experience under her belt, both in the private sector and in multilateral development institutions, including in the African Development Bank. Lilian has worked in multiple sectors, including energy, gender, agriculture, manufacturing, and SME across Africa, and she has experience designing, structuring, and managing complex public and private sector investments. Lilian, you will see, is well placed as a sparring partner for Jacqueline. Myself, my name is Joanna Brinkman, and I serve the mission of the GCF as its first Deputy General Counsel. I began my career in a law firm, moved to high-tech and telecom, and much later than Jacqueline, I must say, I realized that I needed to merge my desire to have more impact than just shareholder value in my daily work. And since then, I've worked in various organizations, including the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, and the Asian Development Bank. But now, to our distinguished and inspiring guest, Jacqueline. You worked on Wall Street back in the early 1980s, quit to co-found Rwanda's first microfinance institution, and this experience is well documented in your first bestseller, The Blue Sweater, Bridging the Gap Between Rich and Poor. Your more recent Manifesto for a Moral Revolution will no doubt follow suit, but we're here today to learn from Acumen and its collaboration with GCF as an accredited entity. So, when you created Acumen in 2001, Jacqueline, at a time when the words impact and investment were not yet coined as the one phrase that it is today, and that is on everyone's lips, impact investment. This brings me to my first question to you, Jacqueline. 20 years ago, very few had even heard of the concept of impact investment, and you, of course, made an audacious and meaningful choice to actively merge the two. What were your drivers for focusing on impact investment rather than just on impact, or what was the rigor at the time, just commercial investment?
Well, first of all, Joanne, thank you so much to you and Lilian and to GCF for inviting me to this. I'm a little nervous when you said that Lilian will be a great sparring partner for me, but I'm just so thrilled to be here. And so to answer your question directly, I had never obviously heard of impact investing either. But you talked about starting on Wall Street, where I had seen the power of markets, but also too often the shortfalls of markets that they overlook and sometimes exploit the poor. Rwanda taught me that access to markets isn't enough, that with people who've been truly overlooked, underestimated, left out, you have to work on building capability as well, and that our top-down approach to development, to aid, to charity, too often gets that wrong. And so I would say more than any other chapter in my life, that chapter in Rwanda up and then after the Rwandan genocide, I was not there for the genocide, really reinforced in me that the opposite of poverty isn't wealth, the opposite of poverty is dignity. And by that, I mean choice, opportunity. And so when thinking about Acumen, the first question had nothing to do with impact investing. The first question had to do with what kind of capital would an intrepid entrepreneur that was trying to solve a tough problem of poverty rather than build a business that made money only, what would they need? They would need time to experiment and fail. They would be focusing on customers that only made a few dollars a day, who were living in places with very little infrastructure, high levels of bureaucracy, corruption, complacency. They needed time. They needed accompaniment. And so the big idea for Acumen at the beginning was patient capital, that we would raise philanthropy and then we would invest long-term equity and debt in those entrepreneurs, supporting them with what we call our social capital, our access to networks and talent, measuring what mattered, and any money that came back to us would be reinvested. If there were a conceit at the beginning, Joanne, it was that that the social entrepreneurs could solve all of the problems. And I think right now, what we realize is that for many of the problems that we're all working on, we require public-private partnerships with government, with civil society, with the private to wrap it. We've invested about 137 million now that I'm talking about on the philanthropic side, in about 132 companies. Those companies have conservatively reached about 400 million people. And that 400 million number tells only a part of the story. I don't think we'll have time to go deeply into it, but it's essentially, it's helped build new markets like off-grid solar. It's helped renew areas like northern Uganda that have been traumatized by violence or natural disasters. It's helped create blueprints for private-public partnership. But the key is that was there at the beginning and is even stronger today, is that you have to see investment as a means to solving problems of poverty and not as the end in and of itself.
Thank you. It was an insightful response. And this brings me to my next question. Nowadays, there are plenty of players in the market with a myriad of funds claiming to invest in climate resilience and generally making what they call impact investment. So in your view, how can a prospective investor ensure credible impact? And importantly for this audience, what are the advantages of collaborating with GCF and the opportunities for accredited entities rather than or in addition to strictly commercial parties?
Okay, so those are two really big questions.
Sorry, yes. We're so happy to have you here. We just keep throwing them at you.
Oh, it's good. And they're different. I think you're right. There's too much greenwashing out there. There's too much focus on impact at the beginning, but really we have a whole group of companies that, and frankly, we need them. The focus is make market returns and hope to do some good or do no harm. So that's better than doing harm. What I would hope we start to move toward is a more granular understanding of the different approaches to impact investing. And the way that we get there, of course, is by what we measure, because we're all human, we're motivated by incentives, and we have to figure out early what is most important to measure. And ironically, and this brings us into the difficult, that sometimes means the stuff that's impossible to quantify. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. At Acumen, I would say that for the first hour, we were good at measuring outputs, numbers of jobs, number of bed nets, number of solar lights sold. We could measure carbon offset, but I couldn't really tell you a deeper level of impact on families. And yet we have a manifesto, and one of our values is that not only do we see potential where others see despair, but we listen to voices unheard. And so that line from our manifesto really inspired an approach to measuring impact that came to be known as lean data, that essentially reasoned that it is our duty, if we are there to serve people, particularly people who've been left out, to find ways to listen to them, to ask them what's working, not what's not working. How are things working? And so lean data would use SMS texting, text 10,000 customers of a company at a specific time. Let's say it's a D-Light solar company. We'd ask a series of questions from which we could deduce not only whether people's income had improved, but if they were getting solar light, how many more hours were staying up at night? What were they doing with that time? Were their children doing better at school? What was happening to their health, et cetera, et cetera? We would also ask them if they were happy with the products and how they would improve. And the level of feedback, both quantitative and qualitative, was a game changer for Acumen. And then for other organizations that asked us to do the data collection and the analysis for theirs. And so ultimately we got to a point where we spun lean data out as a for-profit company called 60 Decibels. And 60 Decibels works quite closely with us now as a client, as well as with GCF. And in fact, ARIS, the Agriculture Resilience Investment Screen, has been helping us think about how to quantify changes connected to climate change. But we're also then working with 60 Decibels to develop a climate resilient toolkit for the agricultural side of what we're doing. So it's really starting with the people you want to serve, building from that perspective on the metric side as well. On the advantages of working with GCF, there are many. I would say the first is that when GCF approves a project and decides to partner, and I hope I get to talk about this a little bit more later, it brings a high level of credibility. And with that then comes co-financing. And with Kawisafi, our first fund, GCF came in with a $20 million investment, and we were able then to raise about 50 million on top of that. That changes the conversations, and it gives a level of credibility that I'm not even sure we understood when we first started. The second is that it's been a truly values-aligned partnership with a back and forth, where we've been pushed on key considerations, not only around how do you develop tools to measure resiliency and adaptation, which was new to us when we started the agriculture fund, a $58 million fund, but as early as Kawisafi, focusing on gender, providing the technical assistance that was needed for that. So both of the first two funds have side-by-side grant-based technical assistance funds that are used for very specific purposes. And three is de-risking. And GCF did this most spectacularly with the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, when, and I would say in many ways it was co-created, because when we were talking about how difficult it is to invest in the smallholder agriculture space, let alone do it in the midst of climate crisis, and Lilian being in Kenya, the country is in a state of emergency because of drought, that we needed to find a way to crowd in private investors who were very skittish about low-income farmers and about these markets. And so GCF took a $23 million first loss, and then that enabled us to raise the other 55 million above it, so that investors could feel that part of their downside risk was protected. I truly couldn't sing the praises of this partnership more. GCF's been a real thought partner to Acumen, and has taught us a lot about having hard conversations, over communicating, and thinking big.
Thank you very much. And the values alignment sounds spot on for the way that we work together. Really, constantly checking the values alignments. And thank you very much for this. Yes, you will be able to.
GCF. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think GCF dislikes greenwashing as much as we do. So.
I didn't want to use the phrase, but absolutely yes, we're 100% with you on that. I'd like to hand over to Lillian, who will indeed, with her questions, allow you to dig deeper. And thank you very much. Over to you, Lillian.
Yes, thank you very much, Joanne, and thanks, Jacqueline, for your time, and a very warm welcome to the audience, wherever they might be. Again, following on from the question that Joanne posed to you about the benefits of partnering with the GCF, we know that public and private sector organizations struggle to build a solid collaboration. Now, in the case of Acumen and GCF, the figures speak for themselves. It's been pretty successful, but we also know that the learning curve has been steep, although the benefits have also been mutual. Now, could you tell us a little bit about the secret ingredient that Acumen has brought into the partnership with GCF that has enabled it to overcome some of the challenges that one would expect along the way, and what you think makes Acumen particularly unique in this regard?
Thank you for that question, Liliana, and thank you, quite frankly, for the humility in it. I don't think you can talk about a relationship without talking about both parties. And in fact, I write about how to have effective partnerships in my second book, Manifesto for Moral Revolution. And the chapter is called Partnering with Humility and Audacity. And in many ways, it very much pertains to this partnership. The first is a shared North Star. I talked a little bit about this already, that GCF and Acumen are both very driven for impact on the ground that you can see and feel, and are willing to stretch to make that happen. And so when it comes to what we're trying to achieve, there's real clarity and there's a shared language. The second, which brings in the humility audacity piece, which I think is key to every relationship, but it's really worked well with GCF. So anyone who's listening, who's thinking about how do you navigate, I would say that the first step is the humility to be clear about what you bring to the table and what you do not, so that both parties can be honest about what they're good at and what they're not good at and compensate for each other. So Acumen is still relatively, we're non-institutional, we're nimble, we're flexible, we can make decisions quickly, and that works for GCF because we can pivot and we can make things happen very quickly. That's our strength. GCF operates at scale, and I talked about that before. When GCF moves, the world pays attention. I'm sorry. GCF also has the capability and the capacity internally to support us where we are weak, building knowledge that we need to do. For instance, as I said, on measuring the adaptation and resilience, bringing in the kind of technical assistance into the fund rather than telling every company to go out and find your own TA, which is a pretty radical idea. But we're both clear about what we do well and what we don't do as well. And then the third, and my parents actually taught me this when I was growing up, and I was asking them about their amazing marriage. My father said, I think one of the key successes to marriage is that you have to make a commitment to the commitment. And I think the same is true about these kinds of cross-sector, almost cross-species relationships. So we are committed to the North Star, and we are committed to making the relationship work. So we have relationships at different levels of the institution. All of them, however, are based on being truth tellers, on being honest on when things work and when things don't work. That is not always easy. Something we say at Acumen is this, that let discomfort be a proxy for progress. And this stuff is hard. But the more trust is built and the more both parties realize that the other one is telling them when things aren't working, the more you can do. And with the, I would say the new chapter that we've been in, which is truly new for us, is the extension of our own accreditation. And that came with the Energy Access Relief Facility when we saw the need across Africa and actually South Asia, when many solar companies were running out of cash and closing down, that we needed a concessionary debt facility. We catalyzed 16 institutions coming together. But frankly, I'm not sure that facility would have happened were it not for GCF, who was willing to give a $30 million anchor funding through Acumen as the administrator. It was a game changer. And that also taught us a lot. We made mistakes along the way, but it built more trust. And I would add one more thing, which is the dedication of the teams. Joanne, I know you know Lynn Rowland, but our general counsel, Lynn, is a superpower in and of herself. I've yet to see a road that she hasn't been able to cross, a complexity she hasn't been able to find a creative solution for. She listens deeply. She has a patience that I can only envy. But it's not, as I said, not only been on the Acumen side. We've received a ton of support from the Secretariat, developing country ownership in partnership with the NDAs, the National Designated Authorities. GCF has helped us learn how to do it. Working with different ministries and private sector actors, it can be really difficult. Lynn and I talk sometimes when we're frustrated. Lynn will say, could we talk about the new fascinations that I have? Trying to reorient. And I would say we're still together trying to figure out how we do more to incentivize more private market entry into these high-risk areas where capital is most needed, because too often we see where it is safe. So these are, Lillian, just a few of the ways that I think the partnership has really worked. And just to send something home, when we felt that something might be going amiss, we're the first ones to tell GCF. And frankly, we need to have more relationships like this. So for, as I said, for anyone looking at GCF from the outside, to remember every institution is a collection of people. And so find the really good people, and there are a lot of them at the Green Climate Fund.
Wow. Very insightful. And I think that's really, really, I think it's very inspirational and encouraging. And in a way, your reference to the accreditation, the reaccreditation that is going on with respect to the Acumen, kind of just provides a very good segue into my next question before we open the floor to the audience. Now, we know GCF is consistently assessing its partners, just with a view to ensuring that we deliver the best possible outcomes, both at the climate level as well as to the end beneficiaries. Now, and given the ongoing reaccreditation, if we were to ask you, looking back at the 5 years of GCF accreditation of the Acumen, what did you say you're most proud of having achieved over the last 5 years? And if you are to look into the future, and as you look into deepening this particular partnership, what did you say excites you the most?
So, excuse me. Sorry.
Makes you all choked up, huh?
Okay. Well, I didn't know this was a test, Lillian. I love it. So what makes me proudest, I'm going to answer in two ways. First, programmatically, is what is happened because of the work of so many people in scaling off-grid solar energy access, and particularly you as a Kenyan, which has been so much at the forefront of this. When we made our first investment in D-Light, which is an off-grid solar company in 2007, we're really talking about two business school co-eds who hadn't even graduated, who had a $30 solar light and had to figure everything out of what it would actually take to build an off-grid solar market. We had so much to learn at the time that they would not only have to figure out how to build the right technology and find the right pricing, but they would have to do the financing themselves, the marketing themselves, distribution themselves, and just vertically integrate and start to build an ecosystem. Along the way, we started to invest in other early stage off-grid solar, and we started to get so excited about the possibilities of this new and emerging sector. And by 2015, it was very clear to us that if the African continent particularly was going to electrify, it needed to have a solid off-grid strategy very deliberately for the poor. Our assumption at those days, and I think D-Light was a $40 or $50 million company, was that the more traditional impact investors that were looking for returns but had much more capital to deploy would be falling over themselves to invest in these profitable, growing solar companies. But alas, there had been no exits in the field. The areas in which they were operating were seen as highly risky, with big FX swings, lots of currency risk, and there were no players. And that was really when the idea of Kawisafi came to be. As I said before, $1 million from Green Climate Fund, first for-profit impact fund, was a game changer. We raised another 50. Kawisafi started with 70. It had a goal of bringing off-grid light and electricity to 10 million people in Africa, specifically with our NDAs in Rwanda and Kenya. And we would offset 1 million tons of carbon. Fast forward now, we made our first investment in 2017, which is when the fund closed. That fund has brought electricity to almost 100 million low-income people. It has displaced 16.7 million tons of carbon. Today, if you look at all of Acumen's investments and Kawisafi's investments, which are part of Acumen's constellation, you see 30% of the world's population of people who have off-grid solar access coming as customers of those companies. That now gives us a sightline. That gave us the credibility then to catalyze the Energy Access Relief Fund. That also now gives us a sightline to what it would actually take to achieve SDG 7. Because we can't just continue now to grow big companies, business as usual. We have to find even more creative, more flexible ways of constructing the right kind of capital to go to the places where they are most needed to reach the 230 million hardest to reach people on the planet. And so what makes me proudest of has been that journey that I'm not sure I could even articulate when we started this partnership. And so that's on the programmatic side. Less tangibly, what makes me proud is what we've accomplished through our partnership around activating a diverse community of investors. And our community, as you know, Lilian, is very diverse, from philanthropists to big institutional players like AXA to more hybrid players. It's a real mix. We've been able to pioneer new models like ARIF with a 50% first loss, new ways of looking at the sidecars of technical assistance, new ways of measuring climate resiliency together. The second has been our laser focus on the poor, and that has been so supported by the Green Climate Fund. I go to so many meetings now about climate change, and no one ever mentions the poor, except almost as this big mass of people. And GCF has really gone granular with us in terms of seeing how critical it is to bring low-income people along and find ways to enable them to build their own economic freedom in ways that will help avert long-term climate crisis, but not leave them behind. And with ARIF moving into adaptation, which I think is still very new for the world, and we're learning just so much. So it's opening all these doors to new possibilities, and I'll let that for another conversation. But I guess I could say that there's a lot that makes me proud.
Well, thank you very much, Jacqueline. I think this is, as you say, very inspirational, very insightful as well. And I definitely hope our audience is really taking notes, because I think Acumen has really been a trailblazer in this field. I particularly like your message about audacity, commitment, because it does take that. But also, I think your success is also proof of the opportunity that lies in, at the end of that audacity and commitment. So I think I'll now turn over to the audience for a number of questions so that we do not hog all the time, because I'm sure they have a lot of burning questions they'd like to ask you. The first question we have is, what can governments and regulatory institutions do to increase the appetite of financial institutions to assume risk with blended finance and patient capital?
Well, both the Kenyan and Rwandan governments were real examples of what government can do. When we were starting Kawisafi, we actually had the great honor of meeting with ministers all the way up in both countries, and there was a commitment that both of those governments had made and continue to make to off-grid solar financing, and a recognition that the private sector isn't there to crowd out government capital. The private sector is there to help solve big problems. And if government can work with the private sector as an enabler and in a way unleashes the right private sector players to solve big problems like electricity, what we haven't talked about yet is that it becomes a real jobs play. If you look across the off-grid solar industry, Acumen doesn't account for all of these, but there are 400,000 jobs that have been created, and these are not just jobs, they're careers. And so government can enable, government can advocate, government can be part of telling a different story, that building green pathways out of poverty is ultimately not only good for companies, but it's good for nations, and it will bring in a different kind of foreign investment in the future.
Right. I think the next question will come from Joanne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled the way this conversation is going, and Jacqueline, thank you so much for all these insights. And so the next question, this is again from the audience, is the GCF has invested in funds managed by Acumen, one in off-grid power and the other one, as you already alluded to, in resilience agriculture. What are the main factors that drive Acumen investments in a specific company in these sectors? And how types of innovative financing structures or business models brought by new AEs could particularly benefit from GCF funding? I think our audience is following our lead, Jacqueline, with trying to push too many questions into one.
No, it's good. I didn't fully understand the second part. What could we benefit from?
Okay, let me read the second part again. How types of innovative financing structures or business models brought by new AEs could particularly benefit from GCF funding?
Oh, okay. No, that's great. So the first question is, it's the same way that we've always invested at Acumen. And I'm on the investment committee for Kawisafi, which is the off-grid energy, so I can go into detail here. But we would, from early on, we look at the idea itself. We look at the quality of the entrepreneur, because just in that same way that we look at relationship and partnership with an institution, we know we're marrying these entrepreneurs and that the investments that we make are long-term investments. Kawisafi is a 10-year fund with a 2-year possible extension. So we have to believe in the entrepreneur. And in fact, we typically have the entrepreneur, after we've made progress and we think that this is a particularly interesting possibility in the midst of our due diligence, we will bring the entrepreneur to the investment committee to have a meeting so that we have a real sense of who that person is. For Kawisafi, what's been very important is that the fund is there to not only bring people energy access, but to help build an ecosystem. So we've looked at a portfolio that isn't just about solar home systems, although that's a big part of the portfolio, but also about innovative financing systems like Lendable, Angaza, in terms of back systems. We're looking at biomass, cook stoves with BioLite. And so we think about the overall portfolio effect. Because we're Acumen, we also insist on, with every investment, asking, is this impacting the poor? And show us how. Because we will measure how it is impacting the poor. Obviously, we will look at the financials, the projections, as any private equity investment fund would do. We add these other pieces. One thing that's not in your question, but I feel I should also answer, is that, and in a way it goes back to Joanne's first question or second question about impact and measuring. The teams at Kawisafi and ARAF are paid, Carrie, based first on whether they are achieving their impact goals and whether they are achieving the financial hurdles that were set out in the original documents. And so there's a real alignment there. And we have some big fiery debates, but it's really the idea, the entrepreneur, the team, the strength of the company, and are they impacting the poor? In terms of AEs thinking about creative solutions, absolutely. I truly believe that Yannick and the Green Climate Fund recognize the urgency we have to do something very dramatic about the climate crisis in the next 10 years. GCF is the largest institutional investor in the climate space and is a willing partner, again, based on trust. And so whether looking at guarantees or first loss, I think the key is proving that you can deliver and proving that that a particular mechanism will enable other investors to come in and join. The leverage piece is really important to GCF. And so one of the things that I think about a lot in this moment of extreme inequality is that we have more capital as a world than we have ever had in our lifetime, concentrated in the hands of a few people, both philanthropy and financial. And we ourselves need to be more creative about how we tap into that. And I think that's a real conversation that we can have ourselves as well as with GCF. But think about the leverage. Think about how that creative mechanism can help you leverage other forms of capital into whatever facility you're building.
Well, that's very useful for those listening in today. Thank you for
that. I'd be interested in what either of you would answer as well, since I'm like kind of speaking on behalf of GCF at this point.
Lillian, over to you on that one.
Yeah, I think after putting me on the sparring level with Jacqueline, I'm kind of tongue-tied here, but yes, I think, as you say, we, as the Green Climate Fund, I think, as you mentioned, is our biggest value is first and foremost our risk appetite, our credibility that we bring to the table, and an ability to, marshal and help facilitate and attract additional financing. In addition to that, as you say, in addition to just the risk financing, is also the aspect of walking the talk with our partners, because we understand that not a lot of the partners have paid as much attention to climate as well as economic financing. So it's making sure that we are not doing one at the expense of the other, especially not focusing too much on the economics and forgetting that we have to be also responsible about how we do it. But at the same time, not also being too worried about the future if people cannot make it through the day or through the next few days. So it's making that balance and making sure that most of our partners, especially in the private sector, are also able to realize the opportunity, the massive opportunity that lies in, pushing the envelope a bit, especially in reaching the vulnerable communities and in unlocking the opportunities that lie in developing the climate resilient or mitigating interventions that exist. So I think I'll just say that in a very brief way, so that I don't take too much. But then that also brings me to the next question that I hope you can help us shed some light on. The question we've got is, what can GCF do to attract asset owners in getting accredited with the GCF so that multiple asset managers can get access to GCF capital indirectly? I guess since you have a pretty good side from the private sector side, you can maybe help, and based on your experience, help advise potential asset managers or asset owners look at how they could partner with GCF in this respect.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure I'm the best person to answer that, Lillian. We've been more focused on extending our accreditation to others, which is one way of doing it. In a way, I would say what you just said was really striking to me, because we personally have been approached by some asset owners who remind me of some of the investors who first were co-investing with Acumen in our early days, where they assumed that since we were so driven to solve problems of poverty, that our capital was easy capital. I dare say, I got so frustrated with one co-investor at some point that I said, look, our capital is patient, it's not stupid. And I worry sometimes when I hear some big asset managers wanting access to the capital, that it may seem like easy capital, when in fact, we have to urgently insist on using creative and flexible capital to solve our biggest problems. That's it. And so I don't know how to answer this institutionally. I am not at all qualified for that. So let me just start with that disclaimer, and I'll put you back on the spot. And Joanne, maybe you as the lawyer, but I do know that coming forward with real credibility and a track record that focuses on what was actually done to make systemic change is a pretty persuasive start. But I have totally answered that as an entrepreneur, not as someone with the institutional knowledge of how you guys make those decisions. So over to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to briefly go into that without wanting, of course, to make things sound overly difficult. There is a lot of rigor, and I think that you alluded to that as well, Jacqueline. It's not the easy road. It's not an easy, like, we're the biggest fund, our money is free. Not at all. And this is where we really truly live our values, and I think that that's why it's working so well with Acumen as well. But those are not just words, and not just a notice that we paste on our wall. To live those values, we really need to have that rigor and to have those checks and balances constantly in place. And our lawyers are, as you know, our lawyers are not the easiest because we drill down and we continue to ask those difficult questions. And if we get fluff, we may say it slightly differently from we may not say we are patient capital, we're not stupid capital, but we do continue to ask the question until there is an answer that is satisfying, and not to be difficult, but in order to have that rigor that is needed to spend those funds and to invest those funds in an auditable way, and in a way that really brings those values to life. And it's painful at times, absolutely, but it does yield the best and the longest lasting results. Is what we expect, not just what we hope, but actually what we expect, and the reason that we are so difficult sometimes, I suppose, as lawyers. So going back to the questions from the audience, because this fireside chat, even though it's difficult in this virtual setting, we try as much as possible to get our real life questions in from the audience. And I want to give space to that. So, you said earlier that wealth is in the big funds and in the wealthy individuals, and there's a lot of inequality, and we need to access those funds. We need to find them and put them to the right projects. The interesting question from the audience actually goes the other way. And is what do you think about using crowdfunding to support green projects?
I love crowdfunding. I love crowdfunding. So I just heard an interesting statistic that if you make the equivalent of $30,000 a year anywhere in the world, you are in the top 1%. Think about that. The top 1%. So I do think that we are at such an obscene and dangerous level of inequality that we cannot keep the conversation going around there being no trade-offs when it comes to solving these ultimata that we are facing. That if we don't solve the climate crisis, all of this other stuff doesn't matter. And so I do think that we have to ask for a disproportionate and more flexible kind of capital that is coming from both investors and from philanthropists. But then I love what this question is saying. And I actually think where we may see the most flexible, the most open, the most risk-oriented may indeed come from all of us who can crowdfund in very specific ways. I know that there's a couple of really cool crowdfunding firms in coming out of the Netherlands that have actually raised like $300,000 debt investments for companies like Solar Now, which is a Ugandan-based company. And I think that is something really to truly watch. I have an example, not at all in the energy space, but where I really learned this year during the pandemic, which is an Acumen America company in Los Angeles, So bear with me because I'm taking you way in a different direction just for 1 second. But essentially, I talked about the North Star mission, serve the poor, find a way to get low-income people access to healthy food in ways they value and can afford. So Sam Polk created a restaurant, fast, healthy, nutritious food called Every Table. People have valued it so much and were willing to pay. You see the same with solar when they get access, that they grew to 8 restaurants. First day of the pandemic, everything locked down. The entrepreneur, values aligned, sends out a tweet on social media saying, if you want food, we'll deliver it. If you cannot afford it, we will deliver it anyway. If you are willing to pay it forward, here's a link. And they crowdfunded overnight from so much individual generosity, enough to get hundreds of thousands of meals delivered. Then the company partnered with government. By now they've served over 6 million meals. They've grown exponentially, created many, many jobs. And now he's creating a new kind of capital whereby Black and brown members of his workforce, some of whom are homeless before they work there, have access to concessionary debt so that they can build their own franchises while being accompanied by the mothership to teach them how to do it. This is how we have to start thinking about our capital and building. And we need all sorts, crowdfunding, big philanthropy, innovative institutions like GCF, finding ways to work together and build new relationships. And we don't speak the same language. And we all have to learn how to translate. And those of us who get multilingual across sectors are going to be the most effective in solving the 21st century problems.
No, that's so inspiring, and I now remember that example. That's really and that can be replicated anywhere, and it doesn't have to be food. It just
doesn't have to be food.
Exactly. Yeah. No, so crowdfunding definitely can work, provided we continue to share the same values. But indeed, I like the idea of becoming multilingual in. And this is what we have seen as well with Acumen, that it's not a one-trick pony. It's not one type of investment. It's finding creative finance and also putting the lawyers to the test, saying, yeah, we know hasn't been done before, but let's try this one. Think creatively.
Well, that's right. Well, and because of me, Acumen has its own crazy language, like the moral imagination and patient capital for GCF to learn. But yeah. GCF has a lot of acronyms that Acumen had to learn. And so there's real opportunity there. But the future has to be all of us. Has to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. On all of us, Lillian, I'm sure we have more questions as well from the audience.
I think we are running out of time, but I think we have one question, which is, I think, building up on some of the questions we'd asked you, but I think the audience still wants to hear a bit more from you. This one is talking about honesty in terms of partnership. It asks, the general perception is GCF is challenging to work with compared to the pace at which a private sector entity functions and deals with its conventional lenders. What is it that Acumen is doing differently? And what's the secret of Acumen's partnership with GCF? I think it's pretty close to a question we posed, but I guess the audience would like to hear a bit more.
Yeah, I don't think it should be a surprise to anybody that a public sector institution may be slower than private sector institutions, given the different kind of stakeholders. That said, when we were building the Emergency Access Relief Fund, GCF moved really quickly, indeed faster than some of the other institutions. And I'm not sure exactly. I mean, now we're all on such a spectrum of private and public. So I don't know what the secret is except for trust building. When we were going for our accreditation, it was slower. And I think Joanne really articulated brilliantly the why of it. We were an unknown entity. We were a first fund investor, technically, even though we had made many, many investments using philanthropic funding. And so there was a lot of due diligence to be done. It wasn't easy. Even then, though, we had partners who believed in us on the other side, who accompanied us through the process. And so if you're patient and you want it, and we wanted it, it can happen. I will never forget the night that we got approved. It coincided with Acumen's big celebration of ourselves, and there was dancing in the streets that night. But then it gets easier, because then the track record has been built together. Then the relationships are known. Then when things go wrong and you talk about what went wrong and how it went wrong and what you've learned, more trust is built. And so I think that I think institutions have their own personalities. And again, Acumen has at times been accused of being slow, and then I'll do the math and I'm like, no, actually we're not. I don't really buy that, but I think that to come in as a first time player and want everything to happen overnight may not be rational, given all of the pressures of running an institution.
Agreed. And I think that's a very nice way of wrapping up our evening session. I think, Jacqueline, it's been absolutely an honor to have you on board. I think for the audience, I think you've heard it from Jacqueline and from the Acumen experience. We all know that climate affects all of us, and especially the vulnerable communities, but therein also lies the huge opportunity, especially for the private sector, to actually get in and play a more proactive and significant role, pushing the envelope and spurring innovation to come up with solutions to the world's more challenging problems. As Jacqueline has indicated, this will require partnerships, but these partnerships also need to embrace with them a bit of audacity, commitment to make it work, openness, and also most significantly, the alignment of values. I think she's indicated, well, GCF definitely has been that partner, and I think we've enjoyed also working with and learned a lot from the partnership with Acumen. GCF has the ability to give you the risk, to embrace, and has a bit of a wider risk appetite than most institutions, but at the same time needs partners who are also nimble, who are innovative, who can also help leverage on that to actually deliver more impact. We provide credibility, but as Jacqueline has also indicated, this partnership is a work. Just like businesses usually start with the feasibility studies, and then they build on, they assess, they get a client, and with repeat business, things become easier. I think the Acumen experience exactly echoes that, and I believe our private sector entities can also relate to that experience. So would like to encourage you to embrace that audacity. Join us in making sure that we're improving the planet, improving the lives of people, and making sure that we make sure that this is a more equitable and sustainable planet that we live in. So thank you very much for your audience. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for your time, for your insights, and Joanne also for your support in this regard. So thank you very much, and goodbye from me.
Thanks both of you, and thanks to everyone who's listening, and I just wish everyone the best of luck.